When a billionaire CEO mocked a humble mechanic as just another nobody in overalls, he had no idea he was humiliating the most brilliant automotive mind of our generation. What happened next didn't just shock the luxury car world, it rewrote the rules of genius, respect, and redemption forever. Stay with me until the very end of this incredible true story and comment below what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this tale of triumph has traveled across the globe. The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside's industrial district, where Daniel Carter's modest garage stood like a forgotten relic among the newer auto shops that had sprouted up around it. The faded sign above the entrance read, "Carter's Auto Repair," in chipped blue letters, and the building itself seemed to sag under the weight of too many hard years and not enough customers. Inside, Daniel worked alone in the early quiet, his calloused hands moving with practiced precision as he diagnosed the transmission problems of Mrs. Henderson's aging Honda Civic. At 34, he carried himself with the steady confidence of a man who understood machinery in ways that went beyond mere technical knowledge. His dark hair, peppered with premature gray at the temples, fell across his forehead as he bent over the engine, and his green eyes held a depth that spoke of dreams deferred but never quite abandoned. "Morning, Dad," came a sweet voice from the garage's side entrance. Daniel looked up to see his 12-year-old daughter, Lila, bouncing through the door, her school backpack slung over one shoulder and her wild curls barely contained by a hastily tied ponytail. She had her mother's smile, the kind that could light up even the gloomiest corners of his world. "Morning, sunshine," he replied, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. "You're up early for a Saturday." "Science fair project," she announced, setting her backpack down on his workbench with the careful reverence of someone who understood this was sacred space. "I'm building a model of a hybrid engine, and I need to understand how the electric motor integrates with the combustion system." Daniel felt that familiar swell of pride mixed with a bittersweet ache. At 12, Lila was already asking questions that would challenge engineering students. She had inherited not just her mother's beauty, but also his passion for understanding how things worked, how they could work better. "Well then," he said, setting down his tools, "let's start with the basics of energy conversion." For the next hour, father and daughter worked side by side, Lila's eager questions punctuating Daniel's patient explanations. He showed her how hybrid systems optimized fuel efficiency, how regenerative braking captured energy that would otherwise be lost, how the future of automotive engineering lay in finding elegant solutions to complex problems. "Dad," Lila said, as she carefully sketched the engine schematic he'd drawn for her, "why didn't you ever build cars yourself? I mean, you understand them better than anyone." The question hit him like a cold wind. Daniel's hands stilled on the wrench he'd been holding, and for a moment, the familiar weight of old regrets settled on his shoulders like a heavy coat. "Life has a way of changing our plans, sweetheart," he said quietly. "Sometimes the most important thing isn't following your dreams, it's taking care of the people you love." Lila studied his face with the perceptive intensity that sometimes made him forget she was still just a child. "But what if you could do both?" Before Daniel could answer, the rumble of an expensive engine announced the arrival of a customer. Through the garage's open bay door, a sleek silver Lamborghini Huracan glided into view, its polished surface gleaming like liquid mercury in the morning light. The car's aggressive lines and predatory stance seemed almost alien in the humble surroundings of Carter's Auto Repair. "Wow!" Lila breathed, her eyes wide with appreciation. "That's a work of art." "It is," Daniel agreed, but his tone carried a note of wariness. Cars like this didn't usually find their way to his garage, and when they did, it rarely meant anything good. The Lamborghini's door swung upward with theatrical flair, and out stepped a man who seemed to have been crafted specifically to match his vehicle's arrogant perfection. Victor Hale was tall and lean, with silver hair styled in a way that had probably cost more than Daniel made in a week. His navy suit was clearly bespoke, and everything about him, from his Italian leather shoes to his Swiss watch, screamed money and power. "Is this supposed to be an auto repair shop?" Victor's voice carried the kind of dismissive authority that came from a lifetime of never being told no. His pale blue eyes swept the garage with obvious distaste, taking in the oil stains on the concrete floor, the mismatched tools hanging on pegboard walls, and the general atmosphere of a business that prioritized function over appearance. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied, evenly stepping forward. "I'm Daniel Carter. How can I help you?" Victor's gaze settled on Daniel's oil-stained coveralls and work boots, and his lip curled slightly. "I need someone to look at my car. The engine's been running rough and there's a vibration at high speeds. I was on my way to the Ferrari dealership in the city when this piece of junk started acting up." Daniel felt Lila tense beside him at the casual insult, but he kept his own expression neutral. "I'd be happy to take a look. What symptoms are you experiencing exactly?" "Are you deaf?" Victor snapped. "I just told you rough running vibration. Look, I don't have time for 20 questions from some small-town grease monkey. Can you fix it or not?" The words hung in the air like a slap, and Daniel felt his jaw tighten involuntarily. Behind him, he heard Lila's sharp intake of breath. For a moment, the old Daniel, the one who had once stood toe-to-toe with arrogant professors and demanding thesis advisors, flickered to life in his chest. "I can diagnose the problem," he said carefully, his voice level despite the fire building behind his eyes. "But I'll need to run some tests first." Victor checked his Rolex with exaggerated impatience. "Fine, but make it quick. I have a board meeting in the city in 3 hours, and I can't afford to be late because some nobody in overalls couldn't figure out basic automotive mechanics." Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but before he could respond, Lila stepped forward. "My dad isn't a nobody," she said, her young voice ringing with fierce loyalty. "He's the smartest person I know, and he can fix anything." Victor looked down at her with the kind of amused condescension adults reserved for particularly naive children. "I'm sure he's very impressive to you, sweetheart. But there's a big difference between changing oil and understanding real automotive engineering. Like the kind they teach at MIT. Lila shot back, her chin raised defiantly. "Because my dad graduated summa cum laude from their mechanical engineering program before." "Lila," Daniel's voice cut through her defense like a gentle blade. "Why don't you go work on your project inside? I'll handle this." Lila looked like she wanted to argue, but something in her father's eyes made her nod reluctantly. She gathered her backpack and headed for the small office attached to the garage, but not before shooting Victor a look that could have melted steel. "MIT, huh?" Victor's voice dripped with skepticism. "Funny how all the best minds end up in places like this, working on 15-year-old Hondas." Daniel didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he pulled on a pair of latex gloves and approached the Lamborghini with the focused intensity of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. The car truly was beautiful, a masterpiece of Italian engineering and design. But as his trained eye swept over the engine bay, he began to see things that Victor's casual dismissal had prevented him from noticing. "Pop the hood," Daniel instructed, his tone now purely professional. Victor complied with obvious reluctance, and Daniel spent the next several minutes conducting a thorough visual inspection. His hands moved with the confident precision of someone who understood not just how to fix things, but why they broke in the first place. "When did you first notice the vibration?" Daniel asked as he checked fluid levels and examined belt tension. "About 2 weeks ago," Victor replied, his attention focused on his phone rather than the diagnostic process. "Started subtle, but it's gotten worse, especially at highway speeds." Daniel nodded and moved to the car's computer diagnostic port. He plugged in his scanner, an older model, but one he'd modified and upgraded far beyond its original capabilities, and watched as streams of data began flowing across the small screen. "Interesting," he murmured after several minutes of analysis. "What's interesting?" Victor demanded, finally looking up from his phone. "Your engine management system is throwing some unusual codes. Nothing that would show up on a standard diagnostic, but there's definitely something going on with the fuel delivery system." Daniel continued his examination, his movements becoming more focused as he identified the source of the problem. What he found made him pause, his engineer's mind immediately recognizing something that shouldn't have been there. "Mr. Hale," he said slowly, "how long have you owned this car?" "About 6 months. Why?" "Because I think I found your problem, and it's not what you'd expect." Daniel pulled out a small LED flashlight and directed its beam toward a specific component in the engine bay. See this fuel injection module? There's a design flaw in the mounting system. The vibrations you're experiencing are being caused by harmonic resonance between the engine block and this particular component. Over time, it's creating microfractures in the mounting bracket that are affecting fuel delivery. Victor stepped closer, squinting at the area Daniel was indicating. That's impossible. This car cost $300,000. Lamborghini doesn't make design flaws. Actually, Daniel said quietly, they do. This particular issue affects about 12% of Huracans produced in a specific date range. The problem is that most mechanics don't recognize it because the symptoms mimic about 6 other more common issues. He straightened up and looked directly at Victor for the first time since beginning the diagnosis. I can fix it, but it's going to require fabricating a custom mounting bracket. The part itself isn't expensive, but the labor is precise work. It'll take about 4 hours. Victor's face flushed red. 4 hours? For what should be a simple repair? This is exactly why I don't bring my cars to places like this. You people always try to turn a minor issue into a major job to squeeze more money out of customers. I'm not trying to squeeze anything out of anyone, Daniel replied, his patience finally wearing thin. I'm telling you what's wrong with your car and what it will take to fix it properly. You can take it somewhere else if you prefer, but this problem isn't going to solve itself. You know what? Victor's voice rose to a level that could be heard throughout the garage. I've had enough of this amateur hour diagnosis. Keep your small-time theories to yourself. I'll take my car to real professionals who know what they're doing. He slammed the Lamborghini's hood with unnecessary force and stalked toward the driver's door. But as he reached for the handle, his eyes fell on something that made him stop short. On Daniel's workbench, partially hidden beneath Lila's science fair materials, lay an open notebook filled with detailed technical drawings. The sketches were incredibly precise engineering schematics that showed automotive components with the kind of sophisticated understanding that spoke of formal training and deep expertise. Victor's eyes narrowed as he took in the drawings. Some showed hybrid system integrations that were years ahead of current technology. Others detailed suspension improvements that could revolutionize ride quality and handling. But it was the final sketch that made him lean closer, a detailed design for exactly the kind of mounting bracket Daniel had just described, complete with mathematical calculations for eliminating harmonic resonance. What is this? Victor demanded, pointing at the notebook. Daniel glanced over and felt his stomach drop. It's nothing, just some old sketches. These aren't old sketches, Victor said, his voice taking on a predatory edge. These are current designs, professional level work. He flipped through several pages, his expression growing more intrigued with each drawing. Where did you get these? I drew them, Daniel said quietly, moving to close the notebook. Victor held up a hand to stop him. You drew these. These are graduate-level automotive engineering concepts. Some of these ideas are more advanced than anything I've seen from my own R&D department. For a moment, something shifted in Victor's expression, a flicker of genuine respect, perhaps even intrigue. But then his phone buzzed with an incoming message and the spell was broken. Mr. Hale! A woman's voice called from outside the garage. Sir, the board meeting has been moved up. We need to leave immediately if you're going to make it. Victor's expression hardened again as he remembered who he was and where he was standing. The momentary interest in Daniel's work was replaced by his original disdain, amplified now by what he clearly saw as presumption. You know what this is, he said, holding up the notebook. This is what happens when mediocre minds try to play in arenas they don't belong in. You sit here in your little garage sketching fantasy improvements to cars you'll never afford, telling yourself you're some kind of unrecognized genius. Daniel felt the words hit him like physical blows, each one finding its mark with surgical precision. But it was the laugh that followed, cruel and dismissive, that cut deepest. The truth is, Victor continued, warming to his theme, you're exactly where you belong. Fixing other people's cars because you don't have what it takes to build your own. These drawings, he waved the notebook dismissively. They're the automotive equivalent of fantasy football. Fun to think about, but ultimately meaningless. Dad. Lila's voice came from the office doorway, small and uncertain. Daniel turned to see his daughter watching the exchange with wide, hurt eyes. In that moment, he realized that Victor's cruelty wasn't just attacking him, it was attacking everything Lila believed about her father, everything that made her proud to be his daughter. "Mr. Hale," Daniel said, his voice deadly quiet. "I think it's time for you to leave." Victor laughed again, tossing the notebook onto the workbench with casual contempt. "Gladly. I'll take my car to people who actually know what they're doing, not wannabe engineers who never made it out of Nowheresville." He climbed into the Lamborghini and fired up the engine, the powerful V10 roaring to life with a sound like barely contained violence. As he backed out of the garage, he rolled down his window one last time. "Here's some free advice," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the garage. "Stop pretending to be something you're not. The world has enough dreamers, and not enough people willing to accept their limitations." The Lamborghini roared away, leaving behind the acrid smell of expensive exhaust and the echoes of words that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Daniel stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the empty space where the car had been. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, and he could feel the weight of Lila's gaze on his back like a physical presence. "Dad," she said again, her voice even smaller than before. He turned to face her, and the sight of tears threatening to spill from her young eyes nearly broke his heart. "I'm sorry you had to hear that, sweetheart. But he's wrong, isn't he?" she asked, stepping closer. "About you, about your drawings. He doesn't know anything about you." Daniel knelt down, so they were at eye level, his hands gently gripping her shoulders. "Some people," he said carefully, "judge others based on what they see on the surface. They don't take the time to understand what's underneath." "But your drawings are amazing," Lila insisted. "Those designs could change everything. Why don't you show them to someone who would understand?" The question hung between them like a bridge Daniel wasn't sure he was ready to cross. For 6 years, ever since Sarah's death, he had poured his grief and his dreams into those sketches. They were his way of staying connected to the engineer he had once been, the man who had believed he could change the world with the right idea and enough determination. But they were also private, sacred. The last connection he had to a version of himself that had died along with his wife on a rainy Tuesday evening when a drunk driver had run a red light and stolen his future in the space of a heartbeat. "It's complicated, Lila," he said finally. "Sometimes the world isn't ready for new ideas, even good ones. Or sometimes people are just scared to try," she replied with the devastating honesty that only children could deliver. Daniel felt something twist in his chest, a familiar ache that had been his constant companion for too long. He looked at his daughter's face, saw the fierce belief she had in him, and wondered when he had stopped believing in himself. "Come on," he said, standing up and taking her hand. "Let's finish your hybrid engine model. We've got a science fair to win." As they walked back to the workbench, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the universe's careful balance. Victor Hale's words echoed in his mind, but beneath the sting of humiliation, a different emotion was beginning to take root. For the first time in years, Daniel Carter was starting to get angry. And sometimes, anger was exactly what the world needed to witness the birth of something extraordinary. The afternoon sun slanted through the garage's windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor, where father and daughter worked side by side, neither of them aware that their quiet Saturday morning had just become the first chapter in a story that would reshape both their lives forever. Outside, the sound of Victor Hale's Lamborghini grew fainter as it disappeared into the distance, carrying with it the last echoes of a man who had just made the biggest mistake of his career and who had no idea that his casual cruelty had just awakened a sleeping giant. In the days to come, the world would learn what Lila had always known, that greatness didn't always announce itself with fanfare and expensive suits. Sometimes it wore coveralls and worked with its hands quietly building the future one precise calculation at a time. But that revelation was still to come. For now, there was only a father and daughter, a notebook full of dreams, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow might just be different than today. The weeks that followed Victor Hale's humiliating visit passed like a slow-burning fuse, each day adding another layer of tension to Daniel's increasingly restless nights. He threw himself into his work with renewed intensity, but even Mrs. Henderson noticed the change in him when she came to pick up her Honda. "You seem different, Daniel," she said, counting out bills from her worn purse. "More, I don't know, focused, angry?" "Just trying to stay busy," he replied, but his eyes drifted to the notebook that had become both his sanctuary and his torment. Every evening after Lila went to bed, he found himself adding new sketches, refining old ideas, pushing the boundaries of what was possible in automotive engineering. "Maybe it's time to stop hiding," Lila said one evening, catching him hunched over his drawings at the kitchen table. She was supposed to be asleep, but Daniel had learned long ago that his daughter inherited more than just her mother's smile. She had Sarah's ability to appear whenever he needed her most. "I'm not hiding," Daniel protested weakly. "Then what do you call this?" Lila gestured at the papers spread across the table. "Dad, these designs could save lives. That hybrid braking system you drew last week, that could prevent accidents. And this suspension design, it could make cars safer for families like us." Daniel's pen stilled in his hand. Sometimes his 12-year-old daughter possessed wisdom that left him breathless. "It's not that simple, sweetheart. The automotive industry is complicated. It takes connections, money, influence. It takes courage." Lila interrupted, settling into the chair across from him. "Mom always said you had more courage than anyone she knew. What happened to that?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Daniel looked at his daughter's earnest face and felt something crack open in his chest, a wound he'd been protecting for so long that he'd forgotten it was there. "Your mom died because of a design flaw," he said quietly, the words falling from his lips like stones. "The airbag system in her car failed, a known issue that the manufacturer chose to ignore because fixing it would have cost them millions." Lila's eyes widened, but she didn't look away. "You never told me that. You were 6. You didn't need to know that the world could be so careless with people's lives." Daniel's voice grew thick with emotion. "I couldn't save her, but I told myself I could save others. That's what all these designs are really about, making sure no other little girl loses her mom because some executive decided that profits mattered more than people." "Then why are you still hiding?" Lila asked, her voice gentle but insistent. "If that's what you really want, why haven't you tried?" Before Daniel could answer, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, but something about the late hour made him answer. "Mr. Carter." The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight Italian accent. "This is Dr. Isabella Rossi from Ferrari, North America. I hope I'm not calling too late." Daniel's heart stopped. "Ferrari, I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number." "Actually, I don't. I'm calling about some automotive designs that have recently come to my attention. Would you have time to meet tomorrow? I'm flying into Detroit, but I could make a detour to your location if you're available." "I don't understand," Daniel said, his mind racing. "How did you get my name?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Let's just say that word travels fast in certain circles when something truly innovative appears. Are you free tomorrow afternoon, Mr. Carter?" Daniel looked across the table at Lila, who was watching him with barely contained excitement. "Yes," he heard himself say. "Yes, I'm free." "Excellent, I'll be there at 2 o'clock. And, Mr. Carter, bring your notebook." The line went dead, leaving Daniel staring at his phone in bewilderment. How could Ferrari possibly know about his designs? Who had seen his work? Dad. Lila whispered, her eyes shining. "This is it. This is your chance." But Daniel's mind was already racing ahead, trying to understand how his private sketches had somehow reached the attention of one of the world's most prestigious automotive companies. The only person who had seen them recently was Victor Hale, he breathed. The realization hit him like cold water. Somehow, despite his cruel dismissal and mocking laughter, Victor must have photographed or copied his designs. But why would he share them with Ferrari? The man had made it abundantly clear that he considered Daniel's work to be worthless fantasy. Sleep eluded Daniel that night. He paced the small house, alternating between excitement and dread, while scenarios played out in his mind. Maybe Dr. Razi was coming to offer him a job. Maybe she was coming to accuse him of stealing designs. Maybe Victor Hale had set him up for some elaborate humiliation. By morning, Daniel had convinced himself that the call had been a mistake, that Dr. Razi would take one look at his humble garage and realize she'd made an error. But at exactly 2 o'clock, a sleek black sedan pulled into his driveway, followed by a second car containing what appeared to be a security detail. The woman who emerged from the sedan was not what Daniel had expected. Dr. Isabella Rossi was perhaps 40, with dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room, but her smile was warm and genuine as she approached the garage. "Mr. Carter," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to see me on such short notice." "Dr. Razi," Daniel replied, still somewhat dazed by the surreal nature of the situation. "I have to admit I'm not entirely sure why you're here." "May we speak privately?" she asked, glancing around the garage with the keen eyes of someone who understood machinery at a fundamental level. "What I have to discuss is sensitive." Daniel led her to the small office attached to the garage, his hands trembling slightly as he closed the door behind them. Dr. Rossi took a seat across from his desk and pulled out a tablet, her fingers dancing across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Carter," she began. 3 days ago, a series of automotive design schematics appeared on several industry forums. The quality of the work was immediately apparent to anyone with serious engineering background. Within hours, they had been shared across professional networks, analyzed by some of the brightest minds in automotive design. She turned the tablet toward him, and Daniel's heart nearly stopped. There, displayed in high-definition clarity, were his designs. Every sketch, every calculation, every carefully rendered detail from his private notebook. "How?" he whispered. "They were posted anonymously." Dr. Razi continued, "but with enough context for us to trace them back to their source. The individual who shared them claimed they were the work of a small-town mechanic who doesn't know his place." Her eyes flashed with something that might have been anger. "I suspect the intent was to embarrass you, to hold your work up for ridicule." Daniel felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in his chest. Victor Hale had found a way to twist the knife even deeper to expose his private dreams to public mockery. However, Dr. Razi said, her tone shifting, the response was quite different than expected. Instead of ridicule, these designs have generated more excitement in the automotive engineering community than anything I've seen in 20 years. Daniel blinked, certain he had misheard. Excitement. "Mr. Carter, your hybrid braking system design has already been analyzed by our top engineers at Maranello. They estimate it could improve regenerative efficiency by 37%, while reducing stopping distances by an average of 15 feet. Your suspension architecture," she shook her head in apparent amazement. "It addresses harmonics issues that have plagued high-performance vehicles for decades." She swiped to another image on the tablet. "But this mounting bracket designed the one for eliminating fuel injection resonance. This is what convinced me to fly here personally. We've been struggling with this exact problem in our new hypercar prototype. Our team has spent 8 months and roughly $2 million trying to solve it, and here you've sketched out an elegant solution that we estimate would cost less than $50 per vehicle to implement." Daniel stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. "You're serious?" "Completely serious." Dr. Razi leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Mr. Carter, where did you study MIT as the forum posts suggested?" "Yes, but I never finished my doctorate. I left after my wife died." "May I ask what your dissertation topic was?" "Harmonic resonance in high-performance automotive systems," Daniel said quietly. "I was specifically researching solutions for eliminating vibration-induced component failure." Dr. Rossi sat back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. Of course you were. Mr. Carter, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you currently under any kind of employment contract or intellectual property agreement that would prevent you from consulting with Ferrari? No. I run this garage. That's it. Good. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick document. Because I'd like to offer you a consulting position with Ferrari North America effective immediately. The salary is quite generous and the work would allow you to continue operating your garage while contributing to some of the most advanced automotive projects in the world. Daniel's hands shook as he looked at the contract. The salary figure alone was more than he typically made in a year. I don't understand. Why me? Surely you have engineers with more experience, more credentials. Mr. Carter, Dr. Rossi said gently, credentials are pieces of paper. What you have is something much rarer, the ability to see solutions that others miss. In my 20-year career, I've worked with thousands of engineers. Some are technically proficient, some are creative, a few are brilliant. But I've never encountered someone who combines technical excellence with such intuitive understanding of mechanical systems. She gestured toward the tablet. These designs weren't created through trial and error or computer modeling. They're the product of deep fundamental understanding. You see cars not as collections of parts, but as integrated systems. That kind of thinking is exactly what the industry needs. Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. For 6 years, he had been diminished, dismissed, treated as if his knowledge and passion meant nothing. And now this woman, this brilliant, accomplished woman, was sitting in his modest office, telling him that his work had value. There's something else, Dr. Rossi continued. Ferrari is partnering with several universities on an advanced automotive engineering program. We're looking for someone to help develop curriculum to teach the next generation of engineers to think beyond conventional limitations. The position would be part-time, but it would allow you to shape the future of automotive education. Teaching. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. It had been his dream once before life had demanded different choices. Your daughter, Dr. Rossi said, glancing toward the garage where Lila was visible through the office window, working on her science fair project. She's quite impressive. I spoke with her briefly when I arrived. She explained her hybrid engine model with remarkable sophistication. She's everything to me, Daniel said simply. I can see that. And I can also see that she's incredibly proud of her father, as she should be. Dr. Rossi's expression grew serious. Mr. Carter, I want to be clear about something. This offer isn't charity, and it's not sympathy. It's recognition of extraordinary talent that happens to reside in an unexpected place. Daniel looked through the window at Lila, who was carefully adjusting components in her model engine. His daughter had believed in him when he had stopped believing in himself. She had seen the man he could be when all he could see was the man he thought he'd failed to become. The person who posted your designs, Dr. Rossi said quietly, they intended to humiliate you. Instead, they've given you a platform to show the world what you're capable of. Sometimes our enemies do us the greatest favors without meaning to. Daniel thought of Victor Hale's sneering face, his casual cruelty, his assumption that small-town mechanics were beneath his notice. The man had tried to destroy Daniel's confidence, to reduce his dreams to ash. Instead, he had inadvertently launched Daniel toward the life he was meant to live. There's a conference next week in Detroit, Dr. Rossi continued. The International Automotive Innovation Summit. Every major manufacturer will be there along with the industry's top engineers and designers. I'd like you to present your work to the assembly. It would be your formal introduction to the automotive engineering community. Daniel's pulse quickened. Present to how many people? About 1,500. The presentation would be jointly sponsored by Ferrari and the Society of Automotive Engineers. It's quite an honor, the kind of platform that launches careers. The magnitude of what she was offering hit Daniel like a physical force. A week ago, he had been invisible, dismissed, mocked. Now he was being invited to address the most influential gathering in automotive engineering. I need to think about this, he said finally. Of course. Dr. Rossi stood and handed him her card. But don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often, and the world needs what you have to offer. After she left, Daniel sat alone in his office for a long time, staring at the contract and trying to make sense of what had just happened. The sound of Lila working in the garage provided a steady counterpoint to his racing thoughts. Finally, he walked out to where his daughter was putting the finishing touches on her hybrid engine model. The precision of her work, the careful attention to detail, reminded him so much of her mother that it made his chest ache. "Dad," Lila looked up from her project. "Who was that lady?" She seemed important. "She was," Daniel said, settling onto a stool beside her workbench. "She's from Ferrari. She wants to offer me a job." Lila's eyes went wide. "Ferrari? Like the Ferrari. Like the Ferrari. Dad, that's amazing." Lila threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him off the stool. "You're going to work for Ferrari." "I haven't said yes yet," Daniel cautioned, but he couldn't keep the smile from spreading across his face. "Why not?" Lila pulled back to look at him. "It's everything you've ever wanted." "Is it?" Daniel asked. "What about this place? What about our life here? What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail?" Lila was quiet for a moment, considering his questions with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Dad," she said finally, "do you remember what you told me about Mom? About how she always said you should never make decisions based on fear?" Daniel nodded, remembering Sarah's voice as clearly as if she were standing beside them. "She said that fear was just another word for possibility." "Then what are you afraid of?" Lila asked. Daniel looked around the garage at the tools he'd collected over the years, at the projects in various stages of completion, at the life he'd built from the wreckage of his dreams. It was a good life, a safe life, but was it the life he was meant to live? "I'm afraid of hoping too much," he said quietly. "I'm afraid of believing this is real and then having it taken away." "But Dad," Lila said, her voice filled with the absolute certainty that only children possessed, "what if it's not taken away? What if this is just the beginning?" That evening, after Lila had gone to bed, Daniel called Dr. Rossi's number. She answered on the second ring despite the late hour. "Mr. Carter, I was hoping to hear from you." "Dr. Rossi, I have one question before I give you my answer." "Of course. Why do you really want me? Not the corporate answer, the real reason." There was a long pause before she responded. "Because 25 years ago, I was a young engineer in Italy who had ideas that nobody wanted to hear. I was told that women didn't belong in automotive engineering, that my concepts were too theoretical, too impractical. I nearly gave up. But someone believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, and that made all the difference." Her voice grew quiet. "I see that same spark in your work, Mr. Carter. The same refusal to accept that things have to be the way they've always been. The world tried to convince you that you were nobody special, just like it tried to convince me, but we both know better, don't we?" Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the truth of her words resonate in his chest. "Yes," he said, "we do." "So will you take the position?" "Yes," Daniel said, and felt the word change everything. "Yes, I will." 2 days later, Victor Hale sat in his mahogany-paneled office, scrolling through industry news on his tablet when a headline caught his attention. "Ferrari announces partnership with automotive innovator Daniel Carter." His coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor. The shattered coffee mug lay in pieces across Victor Hale's office floor, dark liquid spreading across the pristine marble like spilled ink on parchment. For several long moments, he stared at the headline, reading and rereading the words that seemed to rearrange themselves each time his eyes passed over them. Ferrari announces partnership with automotive innovator Daniel Carter. Below the headline was a photograph that made Victor's blood run cold. There was Daniel Carter no longer wearing oil-stained coveralls, but dressed in a sharp navy suit, standing beside Dr. Isabella Rossi in what appeared to be Ferrari's North American headquarters. The caption read, "Carter's revolutionary designs promise to reshape the future of automotive engineering." Victor's hands trembled as he scrolled through the article, each paragraph delivering another blow to his already reeling composure. The piece detailed Daniel's background, his MIT education, his innovative approach to solving complex engineering problems. but it was the final paragraph that sent a chill down Victor's spine. Carter's breakthrough designs first gained industry attention when they were shared anonymously on professional forums, sparking unprecedented excitement among automotive engineers worldwide. The irony wasn't lost on him. In his arrogance, his need to humiliate a man he'd deemed beneath his notice, Victor had inadvertently launched Daniel Carter into the spotlight he'd been trying to deny him. The very act of mockery had become the catalyst for recognition. His intercom buzzed, and his assistant's voice filtered through the speaker. "Mr. Hale, the board of directors is requesting an emergency meeting. They're asking specifically about the Carter situation." Victor's stomach dropped. Of course, the board had seen the news. In the automotive industry, nothing stayed secret for long, especially when it involved one of their competitors making a significant personnel acquisition. "Tell them I'll be there in 10 minutes, he said, his voice hoarse. As Victor made his way to the boardroom, his mind raced through possible explanations, damage control strategies, anything that might mitigate what was about to become a very uncomfortable conversation. But deep down, he knew there was no spinning this. He had encountered a potential asset and turned him into a competitor's advantage through sheer stupidity and pride. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Riverside, Daniel stood in his garage, staring at his reflection in the polished chrome of a customer's motorcycle. The past few days had passed in a blur of phone calls, contracts, and preparations that still felt surreal. Tomorrow he would present his designs to the International Automotive Innovation Summit. Tomorrow, everything would change. "You look nervous," Lila observed from her perch on his workbench, where she was reviewing her notes for her own science fair presentation scheduled for the following week. "Terrified might be more accurate," Daniel admitted, adjusting his tie for the dozenth time. The suit Dr. Rossi had recommended felt foreign on his frame, like armor he wasn't sure he deserved to wear. "Mom always said that being nervous meant you cared about something," Lila said quietly. "She said the only time you should worry is when you stop being nervous about things that matter." Daniel turned to face his daughter, struck once again by her ability to channel her mother's wisdom. "When did you become so wise?" "I've always been wise," Lila replied with a grin that was pure Sarah. "You just haven't been paying attention." That evening, Daniel's phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Rossi's number, and he answered immediately. "Dr. Rossi, Isabella, please," came the warm reply. "I'm calling to check on you before tomorrow's presentation. How are you feeling?" "Like I might throw up," Daniel said honestly. Isabella's laugh was rich and genuine. "Good. That means you understand the significance of what you're about to do. Daniel, I want you to know that tomorrow isn't just about presenting your designs. It's about introducing yourself to a community that desperately needs fresh thinking." "What if they don't accept me?" Daniel asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at him since accepting the position. "Then they're fools," Isabella said simply. "But they won't reject you, Daniel. Do you know why? Because your work speaks for itself. When you present those designs tomorrow, you won't be Daniel Carter from a small-town garage. You'll be Daniel Carter, automotive innovator. The setting might change, but the brilliance remains the same." Her words carried a conviction that Daniel wished he could feel. "Isabella, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "When you said someone believed in you when you couldn't believe in yourself, who was it?" There was a pause before Isabella answered. "My graduate advisor at Politecnico di Milano, Professor Alessandro Marchetti. He was a legend in automotive engineering, someone whose opinion could make or break careers. When I was ready to quit, when the criticism and dismissal became too much, he sat me down and said something I'll never forget." "What did he say?" "He said that the world has two types of people, those who see what is and those who see what could be. He told me that the first group will always outnumber the second, and they'll always try to convince us that their limited vision is reality. But he said the future belongs to the dreamers who refuse to accept those limitations." Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the fear that had been constricting his breathing for days. "And you believed him?" "Eventually. It took time and it took results. But yes, I learned to believe in my own vision, just as you're learning to believe in yours." After they hung up, Daniel walked through his small house, taking in the modest furnishings, the photographs of Sarah, the evidence of a life built around survival rather than ambition. But for the first time in years, he could envision something different. Not just for himself, but for Lila. A future where her brilliance would be nurtured rather than constrained, where her dreams wouldn't have to compete with financial necessity. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, and Daniel found himself standing outside the Detroit Convention Center, briefcase in hand, watching streams of professionals in expensive suits make their way through the entrance. The building itself was imposing, all glass and steel, reaching toward the sky like a monument to human achievement. Second thoughts. Isabella's voice came from behind him. Daniel turned to find her approaching, looking every inch the successful executive in a tailored charcoal suit. But her smile was warm and encouraging, a lifeline in a sea of intimidating faces. "About 100 of them," Daniel admitted. "Good. That means you're taking this seriously." Isabella checked her watch. "Your presentation is scheduled for 2 o'clock. That gives us time for breakfast and a walkthrough of the auditorium." Over coffee in the convention center's restaurant, Isabella briefed Daniel on what to expect. The audience would include executives from every major automotive manufacturer, engineers from top-tier companies, and journalists from industry publications. His presentation would be broadcast live to satellite locations around the world. "No pressure," Daniel said wryly. "Actually, quite a lot of pressure," Isabella replied with a grin. "But pressure creates diamonds, doesn't it?" As they made their way to the main auditorium for the sound check, Daniel was struck by the sheer scale of the venue. 1,500 seats arranged in ascending tiers, massive screens flanking the stage, professional lighting that could probably illuminate a small city. The stage itself seemed to stretch for miles. "This is where the magic happens," Isabella said, gesturing toward the podium. "In 3 hours, you'll stand there and change the conversation about automotive innovation." Daniel walked to the center of the stage, looking out at the empty seats that would soon be filled with some of the most influential people in his industry. The silence was profound, pregnant with possibility and terror in equal measure. "Daniel," Isabella called from the wings. "There's someone here I'd like you to meet." Daniel walked back to find Isabella standing with a distinguished older man in his 70s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. There was something familiar about him, though Daniel was certain they'd never met. "Daniel Carter, meet Professor Alessandro Marchetti," Isabella said. "Professor, this is the young man I've been telling you about." Daniel's eyes widened as he shook the older man's hand. "Professor Marchetti, the Professor Marchetti. I studied your work on harmonic resonance at MIT. Your papers were groundbreaking." "Ah, you flatter an old man," the professor replied with a slight Italian accent. "Isabella has shown me your designs, Mr. Carter. Extraordinary work. You've taken concepts I developed 40 years ago and pushed them into territories I never imagined." "I just built on what you started," Daniel said modestly. "No," Professor Marchetti said firmly. "You saw beyond what I started. There is a difference between understanding existing knowledge and creating new knowledge. You, my young friend, are a creator." As they talked, Daniel learned that Professor Marchetti had flown in specifically to attend his presentation. The old man's presence felt like a benediction, a connection to the academic world Daniel had left behind and was now, in a sense, returning to. "Tell me," the professor said, "what drives your innovations? What problem are you trying to solve?" Daniel thought of Sarah, of the design flaw that had stolen her from him and Lila. "I want to make sure that cars don't just transport people, they protect them. Every system, every component should contribute to safety and efficiency. There's no excuse for engineering that puts profits ahead of human life." Professor Marchetti nodded slowly. "Spoken like a true engineer. You understand that technology is not neutral, it reflects the values of its creators. That understanding will serve you well." As the auditorium began to fill, Daniel retreated to a small room backstage that served as a green room for speakers. Through a monitor, he could watch the crowd gathering men and women in expensive suits badges, indicating their affiliations with companies whose names appeared on vehicles around the world. Isabella knocked and entered carrying a bottle of water and a knowing smile. How are you holding up? I keep thinking about that day with Victor Hale, Daniel said. How he looked at me like I was nothing. How he made me feel like my dreams were delusions. And now I realize he was the one living in delusion. He saw the surface and thought that was all there was. He never bothered to look deeper. Isabella sat in the chair beside him. Daniel, I want to tell you something. Victor Hale is here today. Daniel's blood went cold. What? His company is one of the summit sponsors. He's sitting in the front row. Isabella's expression was serious but not unkind. I thought you should know before you go out there. Daniel felt his chest tighten, the familiar surge of anxiety that had plagued him since childhood whenever he was forced to confront conflict. The idea of facing Victor's sneering contempt in front of 1,500 people was almost paralyzing. I can't do this, he said quietly. Not with him there. Not after what he did. Isabella leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Daniel, do you know why I really chose you for this position? Because of my designs. Partly, but mostly because of how you responded to Victor Hale's cruelty. You didn't lash out. You didn't seek revenge. You went home and you continued working, continued creating, continued believing in the value of your ideas, even when someone tried to destroy that belief. That kind of integrity is rarer than brilliance. She stood and moved to the window that looked out over the auditorium. Victor Hale represents everything that's wrong with this industry. The assumption that innovation comes only from prestigious institutions, that talent can be measured by the cut of someone's suit or the address of their office. Today you have the chance to prove him wrong, not through confrontation, but through excellence. Daniel joined her at the window, scanning the crowd until he spotted Victor in the front row. Even from this distance, the man's posture radiated the same arrogant confidence Daniel remembered from that humiliating day in his garage. He's about to learn that genius doesn't wear a uniform, Isabella continued, and he's going to learn it in front of everyone who matters in this industry. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young woman with a headset poked her head in. Mr. Carter, you're on in 5 minutes. Daniel's mouth went dry. 5 minutes until he either vindicated years of quiet dreaming or confirmed Victor Hale's dismissive assessment. 5 minutes until the world learned whether the small-town mechanic had anything worth saying. Daniel, Isabella said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Remember what your daughter said about courage. Your wife was right. Fear is just another word for possibility. What possibility is waiting for you out there? Daniel thought of Lila, probably in school at this very moment, taking a test or working on a project carrying within her the same spark that had driven him to fill notebook after notebook with designs. He thought of Sarah, who had believed in his potential even when he couldn't see it himself. He thought of all the families who might be safer because of innovations that were currently just sketches in his mind. The possibility of making a difference, he said quietly. Then go make one. Daniel walked toward the stage wings, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the curtain, he could hear the murmur of conversation, the rustle of programs, the anticipation of an audience waiting to be impressed or disappointed. The moderator's voice boomed through the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Daniel Carter, Ferrari's newest consulting engineer, presenting revolutionary approaches to automotive safety and efficiency. Applause filled the auditorium as Daniel stepped into the blazing stage lights. For a moment, he was blinded, unable to see anything beyond the podium. But as his eyes adjusted, the faces in the audience came into focus. Some curious, some skeptical, some, like Victor Hale in the front row, openly hostile. Daniel reached the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. His prepared opening remarks evaporated from his mind, leaving him with nothing but the truth of why he was there. 6 years ago, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. My wife died in a car accident. Not because the other driver was drunk, though he was. Not because the roads were dangerous, though they were. She died because of a design flaw that the manufacturer knew about, but chose not to fix, because the recall would have cost them money. A hush fell over the auditorium. This wasn't the typical technical presentation they'd been expecting. That's when I learned that automotive engineering isn't just about performance or efficiency or profit margins. It's about the sacred trust between the people who build machines and the people whose lives depend on those machines working properly. Daniel clicked to his first slide showing the hybrid braking system design that had caught Isabella's attention. Every innovation I'm going to show you today was born from a simple question. How do we make cars that don't just transport people, but actively protect them? For the next 45 minutes, Daniel walked the audience through his designs with growing confidence. He explained the mathematical principles behind his harmonic dampening system, demonstrated the efficiency gains possible with his hybrid architecture, and outlined safety improvements that could prevent thousands of accidents annually. The audience was riveted. Engineers leaned forward in their seats. Executives took notes on tablets. Journalists scribbled observations. But it was the questions during the Q&A session that told Daniel he had succeeded. "Mr. Carter," called out a woman from the middle section, "have you calculated the manufacturing cost impact of implementing these safety improvements across an entire vehicle line?" "Approximately $12 per vehicle for the basic safety package," Daniel replied. "When you consider that the average new car sells for over $30,000, we're talking about a cost increase of less than 0.04%. A man near the back raised his hand. These harmonic dampening concepts, they could be applied to aircraft systems as well, couldn't they? Absolutely. The principles are transferable to any system where mechanical vibration creates stress on components. Victor Hale had remained silent throughout the presentation, his expression growing darker with each question that validated Daniel's expertise. But finally he stood up. "Mr. Carter." Victor's voice carried the same condescending tone Daniel remembered, though it now sounded hollow in the vast auditorium. "These are impressive theoretical concepts, but theory and practice are very different things. What actual experience do you have implementing innovations at the manufacturing level?" The question was designed to embarrass Daniel, to remind everyone that he was just a small-town mechanic playing in an arena where he didn't belong. Daniel felt the familiar surge of humiliation, but this time it was accompanied by something else, a calm certainty that he belonged exactly where he was. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Hale," Daniel said, his voice steady. "I don't have experience implementing innovations at the manufacturing level, but I do have experience identifying problems that others miss and solving them with elegance and efficiency. I also have the support of companies like Ferrari, who believe that good ideas can come from anywhere, even from mechanics who work in small-town garages." A ripple of laughter moved through the auditorium, but it wasn't mockery. It was appreciation for Daniel's grace under pressure. "In fact," Daniel continued, looking directly at Victor, "I have to thank you for being here today. If you hadn't shared my designs with the engineering community, I might never have had this opportunity to contribute to the industry I love." The audience erupted in applause, and Daniel saw Victor's face flush red with anger and embarrassment. The man had expected to humiliate Daniel one more time, but instead had found himself publicly acknowledged as the inadvertent architect of Daniel's success. As the presentation concluded and Daniel left the stage, he was immediately surrounded by executives, engineers, and journalists wanting to continue the conversation. Business cards were pressed into his hands. Invitations extended, partnerships proposed. The boy who had once dreamed of changing the world through automotive innovation had finally found his voice. But it was Professor Marchetti's approach that meant the most. The elderly academic pushed through the crowd with surprising vigor, his eyes bright with emotion. "Magnifico," he said, embracing Daniel warmly. "You have given an old man great hope for the future of our profession." Isabella appeared at Daniel's side, her smile radiant with pride. "How does it feel to be the most sought-after engineer in Detroit?" "Overwhelming," Daniel admitted, looking around at the crowd of people waiting to speak with him. 6 hours ago, I was worried they wouldn't accept me. Now I'm worried I won't be able to fulfill all their expectations." "You'll figure it out," Isabella said with confidence. "Brilliant people always do." As the crowd began to thin, Daniel noticed Victor Hale making his way toward the exit, his shoulders slumped in defeat. For a moment, Daniel considered letting him go, allowing the man to slink away with his humiliation intact. But something, perhaps the memory of Sarah's voice urging him toward forgiveness, perhaps simple human compassion, made him excuse himself from his current conversation and follow Victor into the hallway. "Mr. Hale," Daniel called out. Victor turned his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Come to gloat." "No," Daniel said quietly. "I came to say thank you." Victor's expression shifted to confusion. "Thank you for sharing my designs, for giving me this opportunity, even if that wasn't your intention." Daniel's voice was sincere without a trace of mockery. "I meant what I said in there. If you hadn't acted when you did, I might have spent the rest of my life wondering what could have been." Victor stared at him for a long moment, his anger gradually giving way to something that might have been respect. "You know I was trying to destroy you, right? I wanted to see you fail." "I know," Daniel said, "but you failed at failing me, if that makes sense. Sometimes our enemies teach us more about ourselves than our friends do." Victor was quiet for a moment, studying Daniel's face as if seeing him for the first time. "You're nothing like I thought you were." "Neither are you," Daniel replied. "You're not the villain I made you out to be in my mind. You're just a man who made assumptions based on incomplete information. We all do that sometimes." "I don't know if I could be as generous if our positions were reversed," Victor admitted. "Maybe you'll never have to find out," Daniel said. "Maybe we can both learn from this and do better going forward." Victor extended his hand, and Daniel shook it. There was no friendship in the gesture, but there was recognition, two men acknowledging each other's humanity despite their differences. "Congratulations on your success, Mr. Carter," Victor said formally. "You've earned it." As Victor walked away, Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The man who had once seemed like such a formidable opponent now appeared diminished, not by humiliation, but by the simple recognition that cruelty diminishes the person who practices it more than its intended victim. Isabella approached, having watched the exchange from a distance. "That was graciously done. My daughter would have been disappointed in me if I'd handled it any other way," Daniel said. "She believes in taking the high road even when it's harder." Wise daughter. The wisest. As they walked back toward the main auditorium where the remainder of the conference was still in session, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text message from Lila. "Saw your presentation online. Dad, you were amazing. Mom would be so proud. Can't wait to hear everything when you get home. Love you." Daniel smiled, feeling the truth of his daughter's words settle into his bones. Sarah would have been proud not just of his professional success, but of the grace with which he'd handled his moment of triumph. The man who had left Riverside that morning as a small-town mechanic was returning as something else entirely, a recognized innovator, a respected professional, and most importantly, a father who had finally learned to believe in his own worth. The boy who had once dreamed of changing the world through automotive innovation had finally found his voice, and that voice was going to reshape an industry. But more than that, he had learned that true success wasn't measured by the humiliation of one's enemies, but by the courage to remain kind in the face of cruelty, to choose growth over resentment, and to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. As the Detroit skyline glittered in the afternoon sun, Daniel Carter walked toward his future with the confident stride of a man who had finally discovered not just what he could do, but who he was meant to be. The drive back to Riverside felt surreal, as if Daniel were traveling through a landscape that looked familiar but had somehow shifted while he'd been away. The same rolling hills, the same weathered billboards, the same small towns that dotted the highway between Detroit and home, yet everything seemed different now viewed through the lens of transformation. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since he'd left the convention center. Reporters wanting interviews, executives proposing partnerships, headhunters offering positions that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours ago. Daniel had finally turned it off somewhere outside Lansing, needing the silence to process what had happened. But it was the memory of Lila's text message that kept replaying in his mind. Mom would be so proud. Those 5 words carried more weight than all the applause, all the business cards, all the recognition from industry titans. Sarah would have been proud not just of his success, but of the man he was becoming in the aftermath of that success. The sun was setting as Daniel pulled into his driveway, casting long shadows across the modest house that had been his sanctuary for so many years. Through the front window, he could see Lila at the kitchen table, presumably working on homework, her dark curls catching the lamplight in a way that made his chest tighten with love and protective, fierce pride. She must have heard the car because she was through the front door before he'd even turned off the engine, launching herself into his arms with the enthusiasm of someone who had been holding her excitement in check all day. "Dad, you were incredible. Mrs. Patterson let our whole class watch your presentation during science period. Tommy Hendricks said his dad works for Ford, and he'd never seen anyone explain engineering concepts so clearly. And Sarah Kim said, 'Whoa, slow down there, sweetheart.'" Daniel laughed, holding her tight. "Let me at least get inside before you give me the full report." But Lila was practically vibrating with excitement as she led him into the house, talking a mile a minute about her classmates' reactions, her teachers' comments, and the way the local news had picked up the story of Riverside's own automotive innovator. "And Dad," she said, finally pausing for breath as they settled into the living room, "I have something to tell you, something important." The seriousness in her tone made Daniel sit up straighter. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about what you said that day when Mr. Hale was here, about how sometimes the most important thing isn't following your dreams, but taking care of the people you love." Lila's voice grew thoughtful, mature beyond her 12 years. "I think you were wrong." Daniel blinked, surprised by her directness. "Wrong how?" "I think the most important thing is showing the people you love that dreams are worth fighting for. That you don't have to choose between taking care of your family and becoming who you're meant to be." She curled up beside him on the couch, her head resting against his shoulder. "When I watched you up there today, explaining your designs to all those important people, I wasn't just proud because you're my dad. I was proud because you finally looked like yourself again." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, their truth reverberating through him. For 6 years, he had convinced himself that sacrificing his ambitions was noble, that diminishing himself was somehow protective of Lila. But his daughter, brilliant, perceptive Lila, had seen through that rationalization to the core truth. Children need to see their parents pursuing excellence, not just survival. "When did you become so wise?" he asked, echoing their conversation from the previous evening. "I learned from watching you," Lila replied simply, "even when you didn't think you were teaching me anything important." That evening, after Lila had gone to bed, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad, trying to make sense of the offers that had poured in throughout the day. Isabella had warned him that success could be overwhelming, but he hadn't understood what she meant until he was faced with the prospect of choosing between opportunities that would have seemed like fantasies just a week ago. There was the offer from BMW to head their new sustainable technology division, the position with Tesla that would put him at the forefront of electric vehicle innovation, a research role at Stanford that would allow him to split his time between teaching and development. Each opportunity represented a different path forward, a different version of the future he might build. But it was the handwritten note from Professor Marchetti that gave him the most pause. The elderly academic had pressed it into Daniel's hand as they said goodbye in Detroit, and Daniel had waited until now to read it. "My dear Daniel," the note began in the professor's elegant script, "today you reminded me why I fell in love with engineering 40 years ago. You showed an audience of professionals that innovation isn't about credentials or connections. It's about seeing possibilities where others see only problems. But more than that, you demonstrated something I've been trying to teach students for decades, that the best engineers are those who understand that technology serves humanity, not the other way around. I have a proposition for you. Ferrari has approached me about developing a new graduate program in automotive innovation, one that would combine theoretical research with practical application. They want someone who can bridge the gap between academic rigor and real-world problem-solving. I can think of no one better suited for this role than you. The position would be based at our new facility in Michigan, allowing you to remain near your family while contributing to the future of automotive education. You would have the resources to pursue your own research while mentoring the next generation of engineers. Most importantly, you would have the platform to ensure that your insights about safety and efficiency, reach not just one company, but an entire generation of automotive professionals. Think about it, my friend. The world needs teachers who have lived in both worlds, who understand not just the theory of engineering, but its practical application and human impact. You could be that bridge. Daniel read the letter 3 times each reading, revealing new layers of possibility. Teaching had always been part of his original dream, the aspect of his abandoned academic career that he missed most. The idea of combining research with education, of helping young engineers understand the responsibility that came with their expertise, appealed to him on a level that pure industry work couldn't match. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Isabella's name appeared on the screen. "I hope I'm not calling too late," she said. "I wanted to check in and see how you're processing everything." "I feel like I'm drowning in possibilities," Daniel admitted. 6 months ago, I was worried about paying Lila's school expenses. Now I'm being offered positions I never dreamed I could qualify for. "That's the thing about recognition," Isabella said. "It has a way of revealing opportunities that were always there, just waiting for the right moment to become visible." Daniel told her about Professor Marchetti's proposal, the handwritten note that had opened up yet another path forward. Isabella listened without interruption, and he could hear the smile in her voice when she responded. "Alessandro mentioned that to me," she said. "He was quite taken with you, said you reminded him of himself at your age, full of ideas but needing the right environment to flourish." "What do you think I should do?" "I think you should follow your instincts," Isabella replied. "You've spent years making decisions based on what you thought you should do, what was safe, what was practical. Maybe it's time to make a decision based on what excites you most." After they hung up, Daniel walked through his small house, seeing it with new eyes. The modest furnishings, the carefully managed budget, the constant awareness of financial limitations. All of it had been part of his identity for so long that he'd forgotten there might be alternatives. But it wasn't just about money. The real transformation was in how he saw himself, how he understood his place in the world. For the first time in years, he could envision a future that included not just stability, but growth. Not just survival, but contribution. Not just getting by, but making a difference. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Daniel was in the garage working on a routine brake job when a familiar black sedan pulled into his driveway. Dr. Razi emerged, but this time she wasn't alone. A younger woman accompanied her, someone Daniel didn't recognize, but who carried herself with the confident bearing of an executive. "Isabella," Daniel said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "I wasn't expecting you." "I hope you don't mind the impromptu visit," Isabella replied. "I wanted you to meet someone. Daniel Carter. This is Maria Santos, Ferrari's head of global partnerships." Maria stepped forward with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "Mr. Carter, it's an honor. Your presentation yesterday has generated quite a buzz within our organization." "Thank you," Daniel said, suddenly conscious of his work clothes and the oil stains that seemed to be a permanent part of his wardrobe. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "We'd like to make you an offer," Maria said, her directness refreshing, "but not the kind you might expect." They moved to the small office adjoining the garage, where Maria spread out a series of documents on Daniel's desk. The papers detailed something far more comprehensive than a simple consulting arrangement. "We want to establish an innovation center here in Riverside," Maria explained. "A facility where our top engineers can work directly with you on next-generation automotive technologies. You would maintain your garage, your connection to the community, but you'd also have access to Ferrari's resources and expertise." Daniel stared at the architectural renderings, showing a sleek, modern facility that would complement rather than replace his existing operation. "You want to build a Ferrari research center in Riverside. We want to build a Daniel Carter research center that happens to be funded by Ferrari," Isabella corrected. "The distinction is important. This would be your facility, your vision, your leadership. We would provide the resources and the platform, but the direction would come from you." The implications were staggering, not just for Daniel, but for the entire community. The kind of high-tech, high-paying jobs that the facility would create could transform Riverside's economic landscape. "Why here?" Daniel asked. "Why not Detroit or California or somewhere with existing automotive infrastructure?" Because innovation doesn't come from being surrounded by people who think the same way you do, Maria said. Some of our best breakthroughs have come from engineers who stepped outside traditional environments, who found inspiration in unexpected places. Isabella leaned forward. Besides, you've already proven that revolutionary thinking can emerge from this garage. Why wouldn't we want to understand and replicate those conditions? Daniel thought about Lila, about the opportunities this could create not just for him, but for her future. Growing up in a town with cutting-edge research facilities, surrounded by some of the world's brightest automotive minds, it was the kind of environment that could nurture her already impressive talents. What about the teaching opportunity with Professor Marchetti? Daniel asked. That would be part of this, Maria explained. The facility would include an educational component, a place where graduate students and industry professionals could come to study innovative approaches to automotive engineering. You'd be both researcher and educator, exactly as Alessandro envisioned. Over the next hour, they walked through the details of the proposal. The financial terms were generous beyond Daniel's wildest expectations, but more important was the creative freedom they were offering. He would have carte blanche to pursue research that interested him, to tackle problems that mattered to him, to build the kind of program he believed the automotive industry needed. I need time to think about this, Daniel said finally. And I need to discuss it with Lila. This affects her future as much as mine. Of course, Maria said, gathering the documents. Take all the time you need. But Daniel, I want you to understand something. This isn't just an offer. It's an investment in a vision of what automotive engineering could become. When we saw your presentation yesterday, we didn't just see brilliant designs. We saw a different way of thinking about our relationship with technology, with safety, with innovation itself. After they left, Daniel found himself standing in his garage, looking around at the familiar tools and equipment that had been his world for so many years. Everything was about to change, and for the first time in his adult life, that prospect filled him with excitement rather than anxiety. When Lila came home from school, he was waiting in the kitchen with hot chocolate and the architectural renderings spread across the table. "What's all this?" she asked, dropping her backpack and studying the drawings with immediate interest. "Our future, maybe," Daniel said, and then explained the morning's visit and Ferrari's extraordinary proposal. Lila listened with growing excitement, asking technical questions about the research facility, practical questions about how it would affect their daily life, and insightful questions about what it would mean for Daniel's work. "So you'd still have the garage?" she asked, running her finger along the rendering that showed his existing building integrated into the larger complex. "Yes, but it would be part of something bigger, a place where we could work on both everyday repairs and cutting-edge research, where you could grow up around some of the brightest engineering minds in the world." Lila was quiet for a moment, studying the drawings with the serious expression she brought to all important decisions. "Dad, do you remember what you used to tell me about Mom's dreams?" "What about them?" "You said she wanted to be a teacher because she believed that education could change the world, that every child she reached might grow up to solve problems that mattered." Lila looked up from the renderings, her eyes bright with understanding. "This is like, that isn't it teaching, but for grown-ups who build cars?" Daniel felt his chest tighten with emotion. Once again, his daughter had seen straight to the heart of what mattered. "Yes, sweetheart. It's exactly like that." "Then you have to say yes," Lila said, with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. "Not because of the money or the fancy building, but because this is how you honor Mom's memory. By doing work that matters, by teaching people to make the world safer." That evening, Daniel called Isabella to accept Ferrari's offer. Her joy was audible through the phone, and she immediately began discussing timelines, construction schedules, and the logistics of building a world-class research facility in a small Michigan town. "There's something else," Isabella said toward the end of their conversation. "Something personal I wanted to share with you." "What's that?" "When I first saw your designs, when I recognized their brilliance, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Hope that the automotive industry could still surprise me, that there were still innovators out there who understood that our work is about more than just building faster or more luxurious vehicles." Her voice grew soft. "I've spent my entire career fighting to be taken seriously in a male-dominated industry. I've had to prove myself over and over again, had to be twice as good to get half the recognition. When I met you, when I saw how you'd been dismissed and overlooked, despite your obvious talents, I recognized something of my own journey." Daniel was touched by her candor, by the vulnerability in her voice. "I'm grateful you took a chance on me." "I didn't take a chance," Isabella replied. "I recognized excellence when I saw it. There's a difference." The months that followed passed in a whirlwind of activity. Construction crews arrived in Riverside, transforming a vacant lot adjacent to Daniel's garage into a state-of-the-art research facility. The local newspaper ran weekly updates on the project's progress, and the town's enthusiasm was palpable. Property values rose, new businesses opened to serve the anticipated influx of researchers and students, and Riverside began to transform from a struggling small town into a destination for automotive innovation. Daniel split his time between overseeing the facility's construction and beginning his research work with Ferrari's existing teams. He traveled to Italy twice, to Germany once, and to California several times, but always returned to Riverside with new ideas and renewed appreciation for the life he was building there. Professor Marchetti became a regular visitor, flying in monthly to consult on the educational components of the facility. The old academic and Daniel developed a warm mentorship that reminded Daniel of his graduate school days, when learning felt like exploration rather than obligation. "You are doing something remarkable here," Professor Marchetti said during one of his visits as they walked through the nearly completed facility. "Creating a bridge between theory and practice, between industry and academy. This is the future of engineering education." But it was the changes in Lila that meant the most to Daniel. His daughter bloomed in the atmosphere of intellectual curiosity that had settled over Riverside. She spent her afternoons in the research facility, asking questions of the visiting engineers, absorbing knowledge with the hunger of someone who had finally found her tribe. "Dad," she said one evening as they worked together on a new suspension design, "I think I know what I want to study in college." "Oh, what's that?" "Biomedical engineering. I want to design medical devices that work like the safety systems you design for cars. Things that protect people and save lives." Daniel looked at his daughter, seeing not just Sarah's smile, but also the spark of ambition that would carry Lila far beyond anything he had imagined for himself at her age. "That sounds perfect, sweetheart." "MIT has a really good biomedical engineering program," Lila added casually. "Does it now?" Daniel smiled, remembering his own dreams of MIT, the academic career he'd abandoned, the circle that was somehow completing itself through his daughter's aspirations. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Victor Hale's humiliating visit to his garage, Daniel stood on the steps of the Daniel Carter Automotive Innovation Center, watching as the final pieces of equipment were moved into the facility. The building was beautiful, all glass and steel and clean lines. But it was the sight of young engineers from around the world, working alongside local mechanics, that filled him with the deepest satisfaction. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Victor Hale. "Saw the news about your facility. Congratulations. You've accomplished something remarkable." Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Thank you. Sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places." The response came quickly. "Indeed they do. I've learned that lesson well." There was something in those words, a humility that Daniel hadn't expected from the man who had once dismissed him so cruelly. Perhaps Victor too had learned something from their encounter. Perhaps growth was possible for everyone given the right circumstances and enough time. That afternoon, Daniel gave his first lecture in the facility's auditorium, addressing a group of graduate students who had come from around the world to study innovative approaches to automotive engineering. As he looked out at their eager faces, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, from a grief-stricken widower working alone in a small-town garage to a recognized leader in his field. But the real measure of his success wasn't the accolades or the professional recognition. It was the sight of Lila in the front row, her notebook open and her pen poised, ready to learn from her father and the world-class faculty he had assembled. It was the knowledge that he had created something that would outlast him, that would continue to nurture innovation and safety-minded engineering long after he was gone. As Daniel began his lecture introducing concepts that would challenge and inspire the next generation of automotive innovators, he felt Sarah's presence as clearly as if she were sitting beside their daughter. She would have been proud not just of his professional achievements, but of the man he had become in pursuing them. A father who had learned that the greatest gift he could give his child wasn't security, but the courage to dream and the determination to make those dreams reality. The boy who had once sketched impossible cars in the margins of his notebooks had grown into a man who was reshaping an industry one brilliant idea at a time. And in the front row, a 12-year-old girl, with her mother's smile and her father's passion, was already dreaming of the problems she would solve, the lives she would save, the future she would build. The circle was complete, but the story was just beginning. The circle was complete, but the story was just beginning. As autumn painted Riverside in shades of gold and crimson, the transformation of both the town and its most famous resident continued to unfold in ways that surprised even those who had witnessed the journey from its humble beginnings. 3 years had passed since that October morning when Daniel first stood before his completed research facility, and the Daniel Carter Automotive Innovation Center had become far more than anyone had dared to imagine. The sleek building now housed researchers from 6 countries, graduate students from 12 universities, and a partnership network that included every major automotive manufacturer in the world. But it was the human stories emerging from within those glass walls that truly measured the facility's impact. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a former Toyota engineer who had come to study Daniel's harmonic dampening systems, had developed a new approach to electric vehicle battery protection that was already saving lives in crash tests. Maria Gonzalez, a graduate student from Mexico City, had adapted Daniel's mounting bracket designs for aerospace applications, earning her a position with NASA. And perhaps, most remarkably, Tommy Hendricks, the same boy who had watched Daniel's presentation in his 6th grade classroom, was now a freshman at the University of Michigan, majoring in automotive engineering, with plans to apply for the center's summer internship program. But this particular morning held special significance, marking not just another milestone in the center's evolution, but a moment of completion that Daniel had been quietly anticipating for months. He stood in his original garage, now seamlessly integrated into the larger complex, but still maintaining its authentic character, watching Lila make final adjustments to her latest project. At 15, she had grown into a young woman who possessed her mother's grace and her father's relentless curiosity, but her focus had evolved in directions that reflected her own unique vision of how technology could serve humanity. "The calibration looks perfect," Isabella said, approaching the workbench where Lila was testing a prototype medical device that combined automotive sensor technology with biomedical applications. "Your daughter continues to amaze me, Daniel." Isabella had become a fixture in Riverside over the past 3 years, officially serving as Ferrari's liaison to the center, but unofficially becoming something much more important in the Carter family's life. The professional relationship between her and Daniel had gradually deepened into something personal, a connection built on shared values, mutual respect, and the kind of intellectual partnership that made each of them better at their work. "She amazes me too," Daniel replied, watching as Lila explained her device's functionality to a visiting delegation from Johns Hopkins Medical School. "Sometimes I look at her and wonder how Sarah and I ever managed to create someone so extraordinary." "You created her by believing in the power of dreams," Isabella said quietly, her hand finding his. "By showing her that intelligence combined with compassion can change the world." Their relationship had evolved slowly, carefully, with both of them acutely aware of Lila's feelings and the delicate nature of building something new while honoring the memory of what had been lost. But Lila, with the wisdom that seemed to run in the Carter family, had been the one to give them permission to explore what was growing between them. "Dad," she had said 6 months earlier, catching Daniel and Isabella sharing a quiet moment on the facility's observation deck. "You know Mom would want you to be happy, right? She'd want you to find someone who understands your work, who makes you laugh, who brings out the best in you." Lila, Daniel had started, but his daughter had held up a hand. And Isabella. Lila had continued, turning to address the Italian engineer directly. You make my dad smile in a way he hasn't since Mom died. You challenge him intellectually, support his dreams, and you've become like family to me. If you two are waiting for my blessing, you have it. You've had it for months. Now, as they stood together watching Lila demonstrate technology that could revolutionize cardiac monitoring, Daniel felt the rightness of it all. The way past and present and future had woven themselves into something beautiful and sustainable and true. Mr. Carter, a young voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Marcus Williams, one of the center's newest interns, approaching with barely contained excitement. Dr. Rossi said you'd want to see this immediately. Marcus held out a tablet displaying an email that made Daniel's breath catch. The sender was Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and the subject line read, Mandatory Implementation of Carter Safety Protocols. Daniel read the message twice before its full meaning sank in. The safety innovations he had developed, the harmonic dampening systems, the enhanced mounting protocols, the integrated protection networks were being mandated for all new vehicles sold in the United States, beginning with the 2028 model year. This means every car, truck, and SUV sold in America will include technology you developed, Isabella said, reading over his shoulder. Do you understand what you've accomplished? You've literally reshaped automotive safety standards for an entire country. But it was the final paragraph of the email that moved Daniel most deeply. The NHTSA estimates that full implementation of the Carter safety protocols will prevent approximately 3,000 traffic fatalities annually and reduce serious injuries by nearly 15,000 cases per year. On behalf of all the families who will be protected by these innovations, we thank you for your dedication to automotive safety. Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. 3,000 lives saved each year. 15,000 families spared the devastation that had torn his own world apart when Sarah died. The numbers were staggering, but behind each statistic was a human story, children who would grow up with their parents, couples who would grow old together, dreams that would continue rather than being cut short by preventable accidents. Dad. Lila's voice brought him back to the present. She had finished her demonstration and was approaching with a concerned expression. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost, Daniel said, wrapping his arm around his daughter's shoulders. An answer. Remember when you asked me why I really started designing these safety systems? You said it was because you wanted to make sure no other little girl would lose her mom the way I lost mine. That's right. And this, he showed her the tablet, this means we've succeeded. Not just me, all of us. Everyone who worked on these systems, who tested them, who fought for their implementation, we've built something that will save thousands of lives every single year. Lila read the email, her eyes growing wide as she absorbed the implications. Dad, this is incredible. You've literally changed the world. We've changed the world, Daniel corrected. Your questions, your insights, your constant push for me to think beyond what seemed possible. All of that shaped these innovations. This victory belongs to our family, past and present. Isabella stepped closer, her own eyes bright with emotion. Daniel, I want to tell you something I've never said before. When I first met you, I saw brilliant designs and recognized extraordinary talent. But now, after watching you work, after seeing how you've built this center and nurtured these relationships, I realize what I really found. What's that? I found someone who understands that technology isn't about machines, it's about the people those machines serve. You've never lost sight of the human element, the emotional reality behind every engineering decision. That's what makes you not just a great engineer, but a great man. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Professor Marchetti, who emerged from a black sedan with the spry energy that belied his 78 years. The elderly academic had become not just a mentor, but a beloved grandfather figure to Lila, and his monthly visits to Riverside were anticipated by the entire Carter family. Alessandro, Lila called out, running to embrace him. Perfect timing. We just got the most amazing news. As they shared the NHTSA announcement with Professor Marchetti, Daniel watched the old man's face light up with pride and satisfaction. There was something deeply moving about seeing his own success reflected in the eyes of someone whose opinion he valued so highly. Magnifico, Professor Marchetti said, using his favorite expression. But not surprising. I have watched you work for 3 years now, Daniel, and this is exactly what I expected. You have never been content with incremental improvements. You have always pushed for transformational change. I had good teachers, Daniel replied, looking between the professor and Isabella. No, Professor Marchetti said firmly. Good teachers can only nurture what is already there. The vision, the persistence, the refusal to accept that good enough is actually good enough, that comes from within, that comes from character. As evening approached, the delegation from Johns Hopkins departed. The visiting researchers returned to their hotels, and the center settled into the quieter rhythm of after-hours work. Daniel found himself walking through the facility, as had become his custom, checking on projects, talking with the night shift researchers, and simply absorbing the energy of innovation that seemed to permeate every corner of the building. He paused at the memorial wall he had installed near the main entrance, a tasteful display honoring the memory of Sarah Carter and all the lives lost to preventable automotive accidents. Sarah's photograph held the place of honor, but surrounding it were pictures and stories of individuals whose deaths had motivated safety innovations, a reminder that behind every technical advancement was a human story of loss and love and determination to prevent others from experiencing the same pain. She would be so proud of what you've built here, Isabella said, joining him in front of the memorial. I think about her every day, Daniel replied. Not with sadness anymore, but with gratitude. For the time we had together, for the daughter she gave me, for the inspiration that her memory has provided. In a strange way, losing her led to all of this. It gave my work purpose and urgency. Do you think she would approve of us? Isabella asked quietly. Of what's grown between us? Daniel turned to look at her. This remarkable woman who had seen his potential when he couldn't see it himself, who had challenged him professionally and supported him personally, who had become not just his partner, but his closest friend. I think she would love you, he said simply. Not just because you make me happy, but because you've helped me become a better version of myself. You've helped me build something that honors her memory while creating new possibilities for our future. Isabella smiled, the expression transforming her usually serious face. I love you, Daniel Carter. I love your mind, your heart, your unwavering commitment to making the world safer. I love watching you with Lila, seeing how you've raised her to be confident and curious and kind. I love that you've shown me what it means to be part of a family that values both achievement and compassion. I love you too. Daniel replied, the words feeling both new and inevitable. I love your brilliance, your strength, your ability to see possibilities where others see only problems. I love that you've helped me understand that moving forward doesn't mean leaving the past behind. It means carrying the best of what was into what could be. They were interrupted by the sound of applause coming from the main laboratory. Through the glass walls, they could see Lila and several graduate students gathered around a computer screen celebrating what appeared to be a successful test of some kind. What do you think she's accomplished now? Isabella asked, smiling at the sight of Daniel's daughter at the center of another breakthrough. With Lila, it could be anything, Daniel replied. Daniel. Last week, she helped Dr. Tanaka solve a battery cooling problem that had stumped his team for months. The week before that, she suggested a modification to our crash test protocols that improved data accuracy by 12%. They walked toward the laboratory but paused outside the door when they realized Lila was addressing the group of researchers with the confidence of someone far beyond her 15 years. The key insight, she was saying, is that biological systems and mechanical systems face similar challenges when it comes to protecting vital components from external forces. The human body uses fluid-dampening structural reinforcement and distributed load management to protect organs during impacts. Why shouldn't vehicles use the same principles? Daniel felt a familiar swell of pride mixed with amazement. His daughter wasn't just learning from the brilliant minds around her, she was contributing ideas that pushed the boundaries of what they thought possible. She's going to surpass both of us, Isabella whispered. She already has, Daniel replied. We're just catching up. As the evening wound down and the center grew quiet, the Carter family and Isabella gathered in Daniel's original office for what had become their weekly tradition, sharing a simple dinner while discussing the week's developments, challenges, and discoveries. I got my acceptance letter from MIT today, Lila announced casually as she served herself salad. Daniel nearly choked on his water. Your acceptance letter, Lila, you're 15. You're not even supposed to be applying to college for 2 years. I took the SATs last month as a practice run, Lila explained with the matter-of-fact tone she used for all her extraordinary achievements. I did pretty well, so I thought I'd submit an early application just to see what would happen. Turns out MIT has a program for exceptionally gifted students who want to accelerate their education. How well is pretty well? Isabella asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer. Perfect scores in math and science, nearly perfect in reading and writing, Lila said as if discussing the weather. Plus my research portfolio from working here gave me some pretty impressive recommendation letters. Daniel stared at his daughter, feeling that familiar mixture of pride and panic that came with parenting someone whose capabilities seemed to expand daily. Lila, this is wonderful, but you're still so young. Are you sure you're ready for college? Dad, Lila said gently, you were working on graduate-level engineering problems when you were my age. You just didn't have the opportunity to pursue them formally until later. I have that opportunity now, thanks to everything you've built here. She reached across the table to take his hand. Besides, MIT has agreed to let me maintain my residence here in Riverside and complete most of my coursework remotely with regular trips to campus for laboratory work and seminars. I wouldn't be leaving home, I'd just be expanding my classroom. And Professor Marchetti has agreed to serve as her local academic advisor, Isabella added. He thinks this could be a pilot program for other gifted students who want to pursue advanced education while remaining connected to their families and communities. Daniel looked around the table at the 3 most important people in his life. His brilliant daughter, who was already charting a course that would take her far beyond anything he had imagined possible, the woman who had become his partner in every sense of the word, and the absent but ever-present memory of Sarah, whose love had made all of this possible. You know, he said quietly, 6 years ago when Victor Hale left this garage after humiliating me, I thought my story was over. I thought I had failed at everything that mattered as an engineer, as a provider, as a father worthy of his daughter's respect. And now, Lila prompted, now I realize that wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of our story. Everything that's happened since then, the recognition, the center, the safety, innovations, the partnerships, the family we've built together, none of it would have been possible without that moment of humiliation that forced me to remember who I really was. Isabella squeezed his hand. Sometimes our greatest enemies give us our greatest gifts without meaning to. Speaking of which, Lila said with a mischievous smile, I have something to show you both. She pulled out her tablet and navigated to what appeared to be a news article. The headline read, Hale Automotive announces major safety initiative, adopts Carter protocols ahead of federal mandate. Daniel read the article with growing amazement. Victor Hale's company was not only implementing Daniel's safety innovations early, but they were crediting him by name and announcing a scholarship program at the Daniel Carter Automotive Innovation Center. There's more, Lila said, swiping to reveal an email in her inbox. The sender was Victor Hale himself, and the message was addressed to her. Dear Miss Carter, the email began. I hope this message finds you well. I am writing to apologize for my behavior toward your father several years ago, and to ask if you would be willing to accept a full scholarship to study at any university of your choice funded by Hale Automotive. Your father's innovations have revolutionized our industry and will save countless lives. This scholarship is a small way of acknowledging the debt I owe to your family. I have also taken the liberty of making a substantial donation to your father's research center in hopes that it will help fund the next generation of safety innovations. With deepest respect and admiration, Victor Hale. Daniel stared at the screen speechless. The man who had once dismissed him as a nobody in overalls was now not only acknowledging his contributions, but actively supporting his daughter's education and his center's research. I think, Lila said thoughtfully, this might be what redemption looks like. Not just for Mr. Hale, but for all of us. He learns from his mistakes, we learn to forgive, and the world becomes a little bit better because of both. When did you become so wise about human nature? Isabella asked. I learned from watching my dad, Lila replied. He taught me that people can change, that grace is more powerful than revenge, and that the best way to defeat an enemy is to turn them into an ally. As they finished dinner and prepared to leave the center for the evening, Daniel took one last walk through the facility that had become so much more than a workplace. It was a symbol of possibility, a testament to the power of believing in dreams, even when the world insists they're impossible. In the main laboratory, a team of researchers was working on autonomous vehicle safety systems that would prevent accidents before they happened. In the design studio, engineers were sketching out concepts for vehicles powered entirely by renewable energy. In the education wing, graduate students were analyzing crash test data that would inform the next generation of safety protocols. But it was in his original garage, now restored to its authentic character, while being equipped with cutting-edge technology, that Daniel felt most at home. This was where it had all started, where a grieving widower had poured his pain and hope into sketches that would eventually change an industry. He found Isabella waiting for him there, standing beside the workbench where his notebook still lay open to new designs, new possibilities, new dreams taking shape. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking about time," Daniel replied. "How it heals wounds, reveals truth, transforms what seems like endings into beginnings. 6 years ago, I was so focused on what I had lost that I couldn't see what I might gain. Now I understand that loss and gain aren't opposites. They're part of the same cycle of growth." "And what have you gained?" Daniel gestured around the garage, but his eyes were focused on something larger than the physical space. Purpose, family, the knowledge that the work we do here will outlive us and continue protecting people we'll never meet. But most of all, I've gained the understanding that dreams don't have expiration dates. They just wait for the right moment to become reality. Isabella moved closer, her presence a comfort and a joy that he had never expected to feel again. "And what dreams are you working on now?" "I'm dreaming of a future where Lila changes the world through biomedical engineering, where the safety protocols we've developed become the foundation for even greater innovations, where the center we've built becomes a model for collaboration between industry and academia." He paused, taking her hands in his. "And I'm dreaming of a future where you and I grow old together, where we continue pushing each other to be better engineers and better people, where we build a life that honors the past while embracing the possibilities ahead." "Those sound like dreams worth pursuing," Isabella said, her voice soft with emotion. "They're dreams worth sharing," Daniel replied. "Isabella Rossi, will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them, carrying with it not just the weight of romantic love, but the promise of continued partnership, shared purpose, and a future built on the foundation of mutual respect and common dreams. "Yes," Isabella said, her smile radiant in the soft lighting of the garage. "Yes, I will marry you, Daniel Carter. I will marry your brilliant mind, your generous heart, your unwavering commitment to making the world safer. I will marry into your family, your legacy, your vision of what tomorrow could be." As they embraced, surrounded by the tools and memories and innovations that had shaped their journey together, Daniel felt the presence of everyone who had contributed to this moment. Sarah, whose love had given him the strength to dream in the first place. Lila, whose belief in him had never wavered, even when his own faith had failed. Professor Marchetti, who had shown him that teaching and learning were lifelong endeavors. Even Victor Hale, whose cruelty had inadvertently launched Daniel toward the recognition he deserved. The garage was quiet now, but it thrummed with the energy of possibility, with dreams being born and taking shape, with the promise that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference. Outside, Riverside slept peacefully, transformed from a struggling small town into a destination for innovation and excellence. Streetlights illuminated roads that would soon carry vehicles equipped with safety systems designed in this very building, protecting families from the kind of tragedy that had once devastated the Carter household. In her bedroom, Lila was probably designing medical devices that would revolutionize healthcare, her mind already racing ahead to the problems she would solve at MIT and beyond. She carried within her the best of both her parents, Sarah's compassion and Daniel's technical brilliance combined with her own unique vision of how technology could serve humanity. And in the garage where it all began, two engineers who had found love in the pursuit of excellence stood together planning a future that would honor the past while embracing the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. The boy who had once sketched impossible cars in the margins of his notebooks had become a man who turned impossibilities into realities. The girl who had lost her mother too young had grown into a young woman who would spend her life ensuring that other families were protected from similar loss. The woman who had fought for recognition in a male-dominated industry had found not just professional success, but personal happiness with a man who valued her contributions as an equal partner. Three lives had intersected and intertwined, creating something beautiful and lasting and meaningful. Love had conquered loss, hope had triumphed over despair, and dreams had proven stronger than the forces that tried to destroy them. As Daniel and Isabella left the garage and walked toward their future together, the moon cast silver light across the Daniel Carter Automotive Innovation Center, illuminating a building that stood as testament to the power of believing in tomorrow even when today seems impossible. The story had come full circle, but the ending was really a beginning, the start of new adventures, new innovations, new lives that would be saved by the work begun in a small-town garage by a man who refused to let his dreams die. In the morning, there would be new challenges to face, new problems to solve, new possibilities to explore. But tonight, there was love and hope and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, against all odds, dreams really do come true. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with promise and full of potential, waiting to be shaped by the same hands that had turned sketches into reality, failure into triumph, and endings into the most beautiful of beginnings.